Hey, everybody out there. My name is Chris. This is Chee-Tash, and today we have another guest on the podcast, author Reuben Appelman. Jay, thank you very much for coming on. Could you please introduce yourself for the people?
Yeah, man. I'm the guy you said I was, and I'm originally from Detroit, but I live out in Idaho right now. I came out here 25 years ago, uh, just chasing the mountains and chasing the dream or whatever. And I've been writing out here since we got here. Yeah, and so I've been writing a couple of books and half a dozen screenplays, and working in television sometimes, and working as a private investigator for the last 10 years. And yeah, man, that's what I'm doing out here, brother. Out here in the Wild West.
And you mentioned that you're in Boise.
Yeah, yep. I'm in Boise. It's one of the last best places, man. That's why everybody's flocking here. I don't know if you pay attention to trends in what do you call it, man? When people move cross country, whatever it is. But yeah, the place is getting about 20, 30,000 people a year, and growing very fast for sure. When I got here, you could drive across town in 3 minutes. Now it takes about 20. So I've been here a while.
What do you think is the biggest difference between living in Michigan and living in Idaho?
Well, man, I don't know. I don't know, brother. I'm not a political scientist or a sociologist or a traffic pattern engineer or whatever, but I can tell you that people are people wherever you go, man. And we all have the same hopes and dreams and fears and strengths and weaknesses, and there's just more mountains out here and more highway out there, maybe.
Do you still miss living in the Midwest?
Do I miss it? I miss the Great Lakes, man, for sure. I miss once in a while I dream about buying up 3 or 4 houses in Detroit and starting a little commune, but you can't afford to do that anymore. They're starting to rise back up. And but about 2012 or whatever, when I was looking online, looking at houses for 10 grand a pop in Detroit, I thought, man, I should buy 4 of those and just move all my friends. And, but that's all I miss, man. I miss Detroit proper. It's a nice place to walk around, explore the arts, and talk to the people. I'm a good bullshitter, so I like to stand on the corner and shoot the shit with people. And I miss that, and I miss the Great Lakes, man. Out here, we have a couple of places where people go a couple hours from here. They go to places that are called McCall and Cascade and New Meadows, and they're these little lake areas or river areas, and with a lot of country around them. And people say, "Oh, it's beautiful, it's beautiful." And I tell everybody, man, there's a million McCalls in Michigan. You got 5 straight hours of this all up and down the coast, and I miss those little lake towns.
You mentioned your book, The Killing Jar, and how there was a series that was created off that. How did that all come to fruition? What's the backstory there?
Yeah, it's called the Kill Jar, and not the Killing Jar, but when I was a kid, somebody tried to abduct me. I was living in Southfield. Somebody tried to get me into their car outside of a strip mall. Well, on my way home from a strip mall, I was 7 years old, and I took off. Nothing happened, but at the same time, it was the mid 70s, and there was a serial killer of kids outside Detroit. The Oakland County child killer had picked off, so to speak, 4 different kids over a 13-month period, and uh, they allegedly never caught the guy. And when I grew up, I started, I became an adult. I started wondering, was the guy who tried to abduct me uh, the alleged serial killer they were looking for? So I spent about 10 years researching that case and wrote a book about it. It turns out it wasn't a lone serial killer. It was what you call team abduction killings, um, and it's quite obvious based on the police files and stuff. The police had opportunities to arrest people for those crimes, and they let it slide because there was political connection and financial connection in the city of Detroit related to those murders. And so I wrote that book about the case, and wrote a big portion of that book is about my life, and And yeah, and then it became the Hulu TV show, Children of the Snow. I worked on that for 5 months in Detroit, with the producers and executive produced that thing and worked on it from a story level and was in it, rolling around Cass Corridor in a well, on the TV show they made it look like a muscle car, because they did some schwangy to the in the editing room, but really I was driving around a minivan, with the crew behind me filming me, and then they did some over the hand shots of the steering wheel, and then they pasted that together with some muscle cars, muscle car footage driving through Detroit and stuff. So they made it look like I was driving like an old, you know, uh, 60s or 70s uh, Pontiac, but I was just driving a minivan. But anyway, you can watch that show, Children of the Snow. It's still playing internationally. It's in something like 17 countries, and it's been on air for 5 years, and it's doing well. Yeah, and you can buy the Kill Jar still, for sure, for sure. Kill Jar, so you can get it at the library too. You don't have to buy it. So
That's and sorry, kill jar, not killing jar. Sorry about that.
yeah, okay, man.
So you also wrote another book, which I actually have here next to me, While Idaho Slept. And what's the brief synopsis of that book?
The brief synopsis. I mean, it's November 22, four University of Idaho students were murdered, in the dead of night, so to speak, in an off-campus house, stabbed to death. And I think everybody internationally even knows about that case. It became the most talked about case on social media that year, and I mean, just billions of views over TikTok and whatever, YouTubers and podcasters talking about it, and all the mainstream media talking about it. And but it was 5 hours from where I live, and um, I have a lot of connections to the University of Idaho, family and friends, and their family, and all kinds of people who went to the University of Idaho, and people who still have their children at the University of Idaho. I'm friends with them, and all this stuff. And so uh, after the murders happened, nobody knew who did it for about, well, my math is wrong right now, but something like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it was. And uh, uh, it was scary. There were six people in the house, all college students. Four of them were stabbed to death. Two were left alone. Uh, it was a gruesome murder scene. Seemed, the contemplation of what had occurred inside that house in the middle of the night was horrific, and I didn't know what was going on either. I was just like everybody else, but I kind of wanted to be a part of the mourning, or whatever you call it. I went up there to see what was going on, and I stayed in a hotel, and I started talking to people, and it was powerful, man. It was like a weird sort of. It's kind of like, you don't remember this because you're too young, but like when 9/11 happened, when Twin Towers got hit by airplanes, everybody walked out into their neighborhood talking to everybody. Like, did you see that happen on the TV? Whatever, and everybody's kind of mourning together in the streets and stuff. And that's kind of how I felt when I went up there to Moscow, Idaho. Um, it was. I just wanted to be a part of the community of suffering and grief coming together to make sense of what had occurred. Nobody knew who did it, but they knew four people had been brutally stabbed, and these four young people, they were 20 to 22, and it was just kind of crazy, man. So I went up there. I didn't plan to write the book or anything, and then I started thinking maybe I should write about this. Writers write to sort of make sense of stuff. Like it's not always. What people say. It's like, oh, he just wants a book. He wants to do a book, whatever. What for selfish reasons? What does that even mean to a lot of writers? It's like, are you kidding me? If I was selfish, I would have gotten into any other kind of job where you can make 10 times the money with 10 times less the effort. You try writing a book and see how easy it is to make a living doing that. And so no, I wasn't up there just thinking, oh, I'm gonna write a book and make my money. Which is what sometimes people say. It's a ridiculous thought. Only people say that are people who don't know anything about the publishing industry. It's tough, and but I went up there, and then yeah, I started thinking maybe I should write about this. And then HarperCollins, the publisher, they wanted an Idaho person to write the first book about the case and or about what happened. And I was already in talks with them to write this book before they even arrested a suspect. They arrested this guy Brian Koberger December 30th. So I guess it was 6.5, 6 weeks, whatever it was, since the murders. And yeah, about that. And then it was like very shortly after that. It was like that week, I think, that they arrested Brian Koberger was the week that HarperCollins said, "We want you to write this book," and because they wanted an Idaho person, they wanted somebody local, somebody who understood the terrain, somebody who understood the people, the psyche, the cultural things about North Idaho, somebody who understood the tentacles, the all the stuff that an outsider doesn't know. And that's funny because at the time there were hundreds of outsiders, parachuting in, I say, to cover the case to make their money on YouTube clicks or in mainstream media ad buys and whatever. I mean, there were so many newscasters out here. I mean, it was crazy. They were all from the outside. Not all of them, but most of them. People shooting in with their big East Coast jackets and their shiny shoes and big hairdos and whatever. And it was creepy, man. Like that was almost as creepy as the murders in some ways. Like there were all these like slicksters, taking over this small town. Moscow only has 25,000 people in it when it's busy during the university during what do you call it? During school, let's call it when school is in session. That's what I was looking for. When
Yeah.
school's in session, they got about 25,000 people there. When it's not, they got about half that. I mean, this is a small town. We're talking 12 to 15,000 people in the summer. It's tiny, um, and then in the fall or winter, 25,000 people. That's half. Yeah, I see you got that University of Michigan mug. That's 25,000 people. That's the whole town. That's one quarter of the population of the U of M football stadium.
Yeah.
That's only one quarter of those people. That's it. So when you take that think of that quarter section. Think of a quarter section of the University of Michigan football stadium, and then you throw in 350 newscasters roaming between people, right? It's like weird, right? They're just looking, you're like, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. Like that's how it felt up there. And so that was almost as creepy as like the murders. What happened after the sort of monetization of the murders, the the um, the money culture, the industry that surrounds the crimes had become almost as unique and creepy and interesting in some ways as the murders themselves. And so I wrote about that too in the book. I wanted to write the whole book about that, to be honest. In some ways I was like, man, that's interesting. But obviously, I also want to tell the stories of the murders and the horrific things that happened that we knew that happened, at least based on the probable cause affidavit from the police, and then some of the things we suspected happened in the house, and then the lives of the victims and how they all ended up living in that house together, and what it's and what a community does to sort of repair itself after the visitation of this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't even remember what your question was, but that's what the book's about.
In a comment on the book, I thought the book was tremendous. I mean, it was very gripping, and I felt myself reading it very fast, like I didn't want to put it down. And great reporting too on the book. I learned so much about the case from the book because most of what I've learned about what happened that night in Idaho has been from YouTube or social media, which I want to ask you about later. Um, Really quick, with writing the book, did you ever have any challenges with getting information or talking to people or your sources? Was it challenging getting information for the book?
Yeah, it was very difficult, man. So let's back up, say like a lot of what you learn is from YouTube and wherever, right? And that's how most people get, at least in your demographic for sure. Like I don't know how old you are, it doesn't matter, but like the it's easier to access news immediately on YouTube or whatever, or Twitter, X, whatever, and so or TikTok. But so you go there first because it's like if you're waiting for mainstream media, they'll come in, sometimes 9 hours later, and you got the thirst now. So you get online, you find out what's up. In the last hour, you can get updates hourly, basically from like what's updates with cases or whatever. So like what a book does differently is take all that in some ways and say, okay, you've got all these blips and these headlines, and you consume your news in 90-second blips. You don't have much depth. You just want the headline. You just want to know what happened. Okay, they're up there. Okay, now they're looking. Oh, they arrest the guy. Okay, oh, they say he did it. Okay, I guess this guy did it, and that's it. And I've talked to so many people, hundreds of people now that are like, didn't he do that? Or didn't that happen at the house? Or didn't whatever? Because the last thing they read about the case or watched about the case was on day 3 or day 7 or day 9 and they're just going on these little headlines. And what a book does, or what a writer of a book does, is oftentimes sift through all that, make sense of it, put it, sort of repurpose it in many ways, just so that there's context at least to say like, okay, here's what the world thinks, and that might take 20 pages or whatever, or here, spread out throughout the book. But here's what actually happened, and it contextualizes stuff for you. A book adds depth and layering and texture, and so a lot of my information as well came from other sources, like according to the Newsweek, or not Newsweek, but according to the New York Times, this and this and this or whatever. There's some of that in my book, according to this, according to them, according to that source, according to that, right? Because that was already out there. But you need that information in a book to address what people think or what people already heard from, the New York Times or CNN or Fox or whatever. And then you add texture and contextualization by doing interviews and doing your own research and investigation, right? The interview part was difficult because the legal system, they put a gag order in place. There was, after a certain amount of time, I forget when this kicked in, but nobody was allowed to talk to reporters, and so nobody associated with the case. That means the victims' families or their attorneys or the legal people in the legal fields related to this case, or the prosecutors, or whatever. Or the cops, and all that stuff. And so people weren't talking. So the people you'd want to talk to, you want to call the coroner and say, hey, can we talk about this case? Whatever. The coroner can't talk to you. You want to call the prosecutor's representatives, they can't talk to you. You want to call the cop who was on the scene, they can't talk to you. They want, you want to call even the sister of whatever, one victim. Well, they can't talk to you either, because that part of that gag order is spreads to all those family members and stuff. So that was tough, man. So I ended up getting interviews though, but it was tough to track people down. I did get some interviews. I talked after, and you feel like a jerk too, because you got to do what you got to do to get the story. But also you want to give people an opportunity. So like if I'm writing about your daughter, and you're Steve Gonsalves, or you're Ben Mogan, or you're Jeff Carnoto, or you're Mr. Chapin or Mrs. Chapin or whatever, and I'm writing about your kid, um, it's not just that I want to interview you for information so I can put it in my book and whatever. It's because I want to give you an opportunity. Like I'm writing this book with or without your interview, because this is what writers do. Their purpose and their mission and their passion and whether they like it or not, their dharma or whatever you want to call it, like, is to write, um, to investigate through writing and to understand the world through writing. And so I'm doing this book right at the time, and you could not answer my calls because you think, fuck you. Um, but and that's cool. You have every right to do exactly that. Or you could answer my calls and tell me what you want to tell me, because then you have a voice in the book that I'm writing. And so it's tricky. You don't want to be a jerk, but you want to push a little bit. You want to make contact at least, because you need to make people understand, like, hey, I'm offering you an opportunity here to like tell me something. Tell me what your boy was like. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what you'd like to see happen. Tell me where you're at. but some people don't want to, and some people do. And I talked to I managed to get an interview from one representative of each family of the victims. I talked to two of the moms, one of the dads, and then one of the family's closest friends, and in a different family. And it's like I was able to get these interviews, and I talked to some friends of victims. I talked to associates, coworkers of victims. I talked to neighbors, I got some information, and it was helpful, to piece together like who these people were and what it felt like after the murders in town, what it felt like in town, how these people, the neighbors, like dealt with, there's a lot of PTSD, your next door neighbor, that I mean, man, you live in a house, an apartment, whatever, and you talk to this guy out in the street, and yeah, what's up? And see him for a year and a half, and hey, what's going on? Oh, you got a new car, cool, whatever. Oh, hey, what was that girl's name? Whatever. Like it's like you just having conversations, and then the next thing you know, four people in that house are brutally stabbed to death. You know, it trips you out. It plays rough games on you, man. And so I got some of that story, for some of the neighbors and stuff. And it's that's important. It's not about exploitation or whatever. It's like, what are we all doing here? If we're not trying to understand the biggest issues in our lives and life and death and big ticket issues. Like. It'd be one thing if I kept calling somebody and said, "Hey, man, tell me about your girlfriend." Like, well, why would I do that? I'll just do it. Just tell me. Like you'd seem like a psychopath, right? But no, man, this is not news. When I was writing this book, I wasn't chasing news, right? I was trying to understand um, the universe, trying to understand the world. Like, what chaos do we live amongst? So that's what's up, man.
Uh, I wanted to ask you some questions about the case specifically, and I know earlier you mentioned some of the names of the victims, and correct me if I'm wrong here. You have Xana, um, Kaylee, Ethan, and Maddie, and there were other people in that house that night as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, two other students. Yeah.
Um,
What?
by chance, the survivors that night, were you able to speak to them or their families?
No, they're under gag order as well, and the survivors, understandably, had sort of like shut the drapes, so to speak. Like they were hiding, running, left and right from press immediately. One of them, Dylan, lives. Her family lives about 1 mile from my house. I went over there and left some notes saying, "Hey, I'd like to talk," but obviously, anybody familiar with this case knows that they would not have gotten back to me. But you got to try anyway. But I did talk to Dylan's dad. I went and met with him at his house, and we sat in his dining room table, and we had a decent conversation. And Bethany, she lived in Reno area. I don't know where. I don't know. I think they might have moved. Like, I mean, they're just because of all this, like it's they were being hunted by paparazzi and reporters and whatever. I mean, when I say paparazzi, I mean legitimate paparazzi. Like, um, a photo of Dylan's sister ended up in the Daily Sun or Daily Mail or whatever it's called, and they said Dylan goes to the coffee shop. She's wearing running shorts and whatever. Like they had a picture of her like she was some kind of celebrity, but it wasn't even Dylan. It was her sister because they're too stupid to understand that it wasn't even her. They just found a picture. Like they took a picture outside of her house, assumed it was her. They posted it, and it was her sister. Like a minor, 17 years old, and they're posting her on the Daily Sun or whatever it's called, the Daily Mail. And so, man, they were running. They were running. They did not want to be in the spotlight. Their four friends had just been brutally murdered. Um, I mean, in the same house they were, and they were just, that will come out in the court case what they were up to at this time. Dylan is notable because she actually appears to have seen the perpetrator. She says that she saw a man walking out of the house. He was wearing a mask. He was wearing all black. He walked right past her. She said she was like frozen. And, your brain doesn't go to like, oh, my friends must have just been murdered. It was like, 4 a.m. And she went back to bed. She went back to her room, even though this strange man had left the house. And people say, well, what? Well, why would she do that? Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she go look around? We don't know the answers to that exactly. Psychologists have pretty good reasons for why she might not have. They say, well, the brain reacts funny in trauma. You can't expect this young woman to know what to do in the middle of the night, maybe possibly after a night of drinking, definitely after being asleep, 4 in the morning, woken up in a like what's going on? Who knows what's going on at any, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you see some guy, maybe she thought she was dreaming, maybe the brain shut down to protect her or fear a trauma response. Maybe, we don't know. Or something that we'll learn once the court case happens, because that the guy that caught Brian Koberger is going to trial next year. So maybe we'll learn something about what happened with Dylan after that. But right now we can only speculate as to why she didn't call the police or whatever until 8 hours later, around noon, when she realized something terrible had happened. And Bethany was also in the house, but apparently has apparently slept through whatever had happened, or was just, there's rumor now that they were texting each other like, "Hey, did you hear something?" or whatever. But we don't know factually what that's whether that's real or not. So um, yeah, man. But those two survived and have not been public at all. They have attorneys that are telling them you cannot say a word to anybody about anything, no matter what, even a hello to a reporter. It's these, whatever it is, it's talking to any of these people is off limits, and they've abided by that, and nobody really knows where they are. I mean, you could find them, but the only reason to do so would be to harass them. You can't really interview them because they won't do interviews. So
Do you think, going back to that night and what the uh, what the one survivor saw, Dylan, do you believe the perpetrator? Is there a chance that the perpetrator saw the Dylan, or were they just oblivious and they didn't even know she was there, and the perpetrator just walks out of the house and goes on his way?
yeah, so I mean, for your listeners, because we didn't really give, they caught some guy, and based on catching him, after catching him, they put out the public information requests for the probable cause affidavit for his arrest came out, and so that document was hit the internet, and basically on the strength of that public information request, on the strength of that probable cause affidavit, here's what we know, or here's what the police say happened. Here's what the police say happened. In the middle of the night, 4 a.m., this guy, who may or may not have known these people, who may or may not have been angry at these people, who may or may not be just a stranger killer, or who may or may not have been slighted by one of them, or may or may not have had a target in one of them, um, goes into the house at 4 a.m., goes up to the third floor, kills the Maddie and Kaylee, two best friends, University of Idaho students, but friends since junior high, and living in North Idaho together. He goes upstairs, kills both of them with a fixed blade hunting knife. Goes downstairs and kills Ethan and Xana, uh, boyfriend and girlfriend, with the same knife. Exits on that main floor, um, through a sliding patio door, presumably where he came in from. As he's exiting, he walks past Dylan's door. She's in the doorway because she had heard some stuff, and she sees him, and he walks right past her. And there's no reason to believe, based on the structure of that house, that the two of them didn't connect, like eye contact or whatever. Um, so presumably she saw him leaving. I mean, based on the diagrams of that house and whatever, he saw her too, probably, um, because it was, we're talking a matter of, like, can you look across your bedroom and see who's standing there? Like that. That's the distance we're talking about. He was in the hallway and she was in a bedroom door, but we're not talking about a mansion. We're talking about a couple thousand square foot place, and it's a regular kind of house in terms of space, like size. Um, and then on that, beneath that floor as well was Bethany. So Dylan was asleep on the floor where Dylan was in her room on the floor where Xana and Ethan were killed. Same floor. I mean, we're talking, you know, you could flick a penny off your finger and hit the side, the other side of the room, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a family style home kind of, even though it was shaped weird. And then in the basement floor, um, Bethany was in her bedroom. So um, anyway, this guy leaves, and yeah, it's safe to say that uh, uh, Dylan and he made some sort of eye contact or whatever, and both understood. Now you can say, well, why didn't she, like, there was this guy, like, wasn't he bloody? Didn't he have a knife in his hand or whatever? I mean, we don't know the answer to that. We can definitely say uh, whatever Dylan's trauma response was, or whatever she was thinking, we'll know. We'll know once the trial happens. We know everything is speculation right now. We also can say it's speculation as to what he was thinking. He just stabbed 4 people. And you think, well, why did he leave 2 alive? We don't know the answer to that, but maybe his own trauma response, maybe his own fight or flight, maybe his own whatever made him just go zooming past her and not take another beat because he thought maybe he thought the longer I stay in this house, the more chance I have of getting caught. Maybe he thought, maybe his adrenaline was so high, it's like his brain wasn't even functioning anymore. Maybe the emotional, psychological, maybe it's the first time he's ever killed anybody. And so he just stabbed 4 people to death. Maybe we don't know what that's like. We don't know what he was thinking. We don't know why he left them alive if he was the person who did this. And it looks like he was because they found some evidence that led to his arrest. One is they apparently accidentally, although we don't know that until the court case, um, or until it goes to trial, but the knife sheath was left behind in the upstairs bedroom after killing Maddie and Kaylee. Somehow the sheath either dropped or he put it there on purpose or it was torn off in a scuffle or whatever. And there was touch DNA evidence under the snap of that sheath that eventually matched to him. It took a while because all kinds of things transpired in the process, but his cheek swab, when they actually caught him and whatever, his cheek swab matches that DNA on that knife sheath. So one can say it puts the sheath as having been in his possession at some point. It doesn't put him at the scene of the crime because anybody could throw a knife sheath somewhere, right? But it definitely means that he had somehow at some point been in contact with that sheath. And then they have cell phone data that seems to place him in the area of that house on a dozen occasions prior. And the prosecution will say that he was stalking them, trying to figure out or trying to do recon on that house to figure out how to get in and out or whether or not he should do the crimes or not. Or he was just, defense will say he was just driving in that area all the time because the cell phone doesn't put him inside the house. It just attaches him to the tower that serves that house. And then what else? They have neighborhood security cam footage of a Hyundai Elantra sedan that he of the type that he drove going in and out of that area on multiple occasions and 3 or 4 times that night. And then and he drives that car. And so there's lots of things, but they don't have an eyewitness, right? So except for Dylan, we'll see. Dylan said that she noticed his bushy eyebrows and his physicality, his stature, or his muscular, said he was athletically built. He had a mask on, but she described bushy eyebrows. Well, the guy they caught, Brian Kober, he also fits that description. So they have an eyewitness, at least as far as we know, that can ID a person in a mask. But you know, whether that'll hold up or not, it's questionable. Well, the defense will say he was wearing a mask. The guy you saw was wearing a mask. Let's take 19 people with bushy eyebrows and put a mask on them. It'll be hard. And it's 4 a.m. and you just got out of bed. They're going to question that. But all that is to say that it looks like they got their guy. And it's just a matter of figuring out really what happened after the trial. We'll know a lot more. But hey, man, who's to say why, whether or not they connected like that, or they looked at each other and had rational thoughts, or whether or not they were both in trauma mode. I mean, I do not know what it's like to murder people, but it certainly seems like the adrenaline and all kinds of stuff, endorphins and whatever, wreak havoc on your normal rational thoughts. And especially if you're inexperienced. This was not a guy who just came out of 6 years of Marine training or whatever. He's just a student. Oh, and also he's a criminology and criminal justice student at nearby university. For your listeners who don't know that, so a lot of people say he was very well versed in how to commit crimes. Even though he had maybe never murdered anybody. He also had posted a Reddit survey at some point related to his master's degree in criminology. And the Reddit survey was like asking for people who had committed violent crimes to tell him what it was like, to address things like adrenaline at the time of the crimes. How did you make your intro? How did you make your exit? Did you plan ahead? What did you plan for? All kinds of stuff. And so he's definitely got this sort of resume of somebody who, if you wanted to say did these crimes, looks good for it, but he was also a PhD student in criminology and criminal justice, and that's what those people do. They research criminology and criminal justice. So you can't say that makes somebody a murderer. Otherwise, you'd say every cop in the world has the potential to be a murderer because they studied criminology, and it's ridiculous. So it's a really interesting case, and that's kind of partially why it blew up, in the media and stuff.
With the law enforcement in the police department, I know you mentioned earlier it took a while for the arrest of Brian Koberger to happen. Did you feel, was there a lot of pressure mounting on law enforcement to catch somebody?
Yeah, man, all these hairdos came in from East and West Coast and we're like, hey, you got to tell us more information, constantly to the Moscow Police Department. And the Idaho State Police were involved, the FBI was involved. But these newscasters, to justify their budgets, because they had a Fox News correspondent out there, 24/7. They had actually, I think Fox had a couple of correspondents. They had CNN out there, they had NBC, they had whatever, anybody you can think of, and they were putting them up in hotels for a month at a time, right? So or weeks at a time for about 6 weeks until they caught Koberger, and then for another couple months after that, they were still there. So if you're spending all this money to have your correspondents on the ground in North Idaho, of all places, you're trying to justify it by making them send you back stories, right? We're going to go live tonight in front of the courthouse. We're going to go live tonight in front of the police station. We're going to go live tonight in front of the murder house. We're going to go live tonight at the Gonsalves family residence. We're going to go live tonight, live tonight, live tonight, live tonight, live tonight. It's just constant. And in order to justify all that activity, they had to keep riding those police, give us more, give us more, give us more, give us more, man. And so, yeah, the pressure was just incredible on the local police department, which at the time numbered 37 cops, period. That's it. And that's all across, I don't mean beat cops. I mean, that's how many police were working in Moscow at the time. But then they had the state police and the FBI and whatever. It's like people say, oh, it took forever, man, to catch this guy. No, man. Quadruple homicide, and with all this media pressure on them, and they still managed to catch the guy in 6 weeks. I mean, that's pretty good, actually. It's pretty good, because they didn't have the traditional evidence that you want. They didn't have three people saw the guy running out of the house screaming bloody murder. They didn't have interior video. I mean, nobody, this happened in the dead of night, and nobody except for Dylan Mortensen has any view of this. When they found him, also, by the way, um, they didn't find the weapon. They didn't find bloody clothes. They didn't find blood in his car, at least that we know of. But I think maybe they found something after they arrested him. They took pieces of his car. They took the clutch. They took um, certain things out of his car that they disassembled and took for evidence. So it's possible we're going to find out they've got more than we know, but I mean they don't have the weapon. Um, they don't have traditional things. But even without that, they were able to arrest somebody in 6 weeks. So that's pretty good
Mm.
for people to just, I mean, like a speck of DNA was really all they had, except for possibility of him having the same car, the possibility of the cell phone data matching up and whatever. Just these are not things that are strong evidence necessarily, though. But it's the compounding of all the evidence, all the pieces. So you say that's circumstantial. Yeah, but they got like six different circumstantial things on this guy, and none on anybody else. So like it just seems to make a lot of sense. Plus, they got the DNA match now to the sheath, and they'll argue like again, they'll argue, well, he wasn't. He might have had a sheath, but a sheath doesn't make him a murderer. Somebody could have murdered those kids and thrown the sheath there. He could have taken his sheath and thrown it in there. They could have done anything. It doesn't place him at the scene. So what I'm saying is they arrested a guy in 6 weeks without the strength of traditional evidence. And normally these cases, if they don't have the weapon, if they don't have, you know, strong material evidence or whatever, these cases drag out. They might not arrest a guy ever, but they found some stuff, I mean, the sheath was the big one. Without the sheath, it's very likely, based on what we know, without the sheath, it's very likely that they would still be looking for this person, because you can't arrest somebody just because they drive a Hyundai Elantra, you know, like you can, but it's not going to hold up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that hadn't been left at the scene, um, we might still be talking about not knowing who killed these kids,
Oh,
which is interesting.
yeah. No, it is. And do you know, or have you heard of anything as to what Brian's motive would have been for these murders?
Well, no, nobody's really. Some people say like, oh, he was obsessed with one of the girls. They say he was obsessed with Maddie Mogan, or he was obsessed with Kaylee Gonzalez. No, nobody seems to think that it had anything to do with Ethan Chapin or Xana Kernodle. It's just that they happened to be in the house. Or some people, though, think he was obsessed with all of them because they seem to have the perfect existence, the perfect uh, all-American life ahead of them. And Brian Koberger did not. He was an outsider, periphery kind of guy who struggled throughout life, struggled to fit in, struggled with relationships, struggled with women, struggled. He tried to be in law enforcement, struggled with that. He didn't get the job at some internship or whatever. He was you know, he had personality problems and difficulty with all kinds of things, lots of depression. He had what's called visual snow, at least based on his postings about it as a teenager, which is a neurologically based sort of visual thing that happens where it's like things are foggy and fuzzy and mess with you. And you're just like, imagine yourself looking through the dirty window and you're like, ew, that's what the world looks like out there. And then you clean the window and everything's clear. Well, he was looking through the dirty window, um, like that's a difficult place to be because nothing, you seem detached from everything, and he felt detached. He felt like an outsider. He struggled with understanding what life was. He saw us all as just kind of bags of meat wearing clothing, and in some existential way, that's really true. When you can get far into your head, you're like, what does any of this even mean? Like, ooh, here I am moving my arm. Well, like, he was in that trip, like where it's like, I don't know what anything means anymore. And you know, he was a difficult person, or difficult. It was difficult to live as him, is what I'm saying. And so some people say that he might have just lost it because they seem to have everything, these four kids, and others say he was obsessed with one of them, right? But my feeling is he fits the stereotype of certain types of serial killer, of mass murderers or serial killers or whatever. And you could say, well, it's not a serial killer; this is his first killings. Okay, but he killed four at once. But my and if he hadn't gotten caught, if it was him and he hadn't gotten caught, he would do it again. Um, but my feeling is that he fits the sort of pattern of what's called a revenge killer. You could say, like, there was nothing that he was really avenging or getting revenge for based on common standards of revenge. But those people, their psyche is such that, like, if you slight them, they can't get over it. They obsess. It swirls in their mind. They think about it constantly. You know, somebody's insulted you before and you tripped out about it for a day and a half or whatever. You're like, God, that person pissed me off. Well, like a revenge killer sort of, it could be the slightest thing. It could be like, hey, I like your blouse. And then she just looks at you like you're a creep and walks away. And then you think that effing, you know, and you start tripping on it, like, and it's kind of like that kind of thing where it's like we might, like, they might not have even known what you know, whatever his target was, whoever his target was, might not have even known that they'd ever met him before. But they could have slighted him in a grocery store. They could have slighted him at the coffee shop. They could have slighted him by not smiling at him. Whatever his trip was. And then it builds and builds and builds, and the pressure builds and builds and builds, you know, and it's just um, uh, and he just thought one day, I got to take care of this, you know, and uh, so to me, I don't think necessarily. I mean, it'll be interesting to find out if we ever do, but I don't think necessarily it's about who was he obsessed with. I think it's about why would he kill any of these people anyway? And I think it's because he's that revenge killer type that, and he has Night Stalker patterns as well, which is the uh, staying up till all hours, doing. He's admittedly his alibi is that he was taking a long. His habit was to take long drives at night. And so he was out driving that night. His alibi is that I was out driving for hours looking at the moon and stars and whatever. And but night stalkers do that. They take long drives at night by themselves to quell the chaos that's in their mind. It's a way of it's a way of, you know, just calming the thing that's brewing. It's also a way of hunting, right? It's like you can look up that stuff and read about it in depth, but to me, he fits those kinds of. If it's him, he fits those things: Night Stalker, revenge killer, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and so I think it's like, who knows? What is the answer to why people kill? And each individual, each cold-blooded murderer is different, but um, to me, that's what it's about. It's not like, you know, it could have been it could have been Ethan, it could have been Xana, it could have been Maddie, it could have been Kaylee, but it looks like it was probably Maddie or Kaylee because he went there first. And you know, some people speculate that it was Maddie. If he was just obsessed with one of the girls, if it had nothing to do with revenge or, you know, whatever, but if he was obsessed with one and his brain twisted to the point where he thought, okay, well, I can't have her, so I'll kill her or whatever. Um, it looks like it was, you know, it makes sense that it was Maddie. It's like Maddie is like, they're all attractive Americana types or whatever, but Maddie was like sort of angelic and radiating and in a stereotypical American beauty sort of way, was like, um, you know, a very attractive, you know, to somebody like Brian Koberger, attractive, sexual, um, you know, somebody who could model things like that. And they were all attractive, but like Maddie would be the one that somebody would be obsessed with in that way, you know, in that stereotypical way. But who knows? I mean, who knows, you know?
Mhm.
And based on Koberger's patterns, though, I say that as well. Like he had a long history of coming on to girls, wanting to have like interactions with them and then pushing him away and stuff. And it's likely that based on his stereotypical behavior toward women, that he also would have been stereotypically attracted to the stereotypical beauty, which was Maddie. You know what I'm saying? Like based on his patterns or whatever. But who knows?
Earlier, I had mentioned how I've watched a lot of YouTube videos surrounding this case, and I was wondering if you could comment on maybe the the downsides, or maybe the if there are any benefits to a lot of people covering this case who maybe haven't been there themselves, but you see a lot of people on YouTube maybe giving alternative theories on what happened and giving their own take on it. And I know in the book you had mentioned about something that happened to one of the gentlemen that was on the video camera footage of the two girls while they were getting food that night, and how he was, people thought that maybe he had something to do with it. He didn't.
Yeah.
He had to go into hiding. So have you seen things on social media just take it way, way too far?
Yeah, the social media hype is such that like people have learned that if they just say stuff, then their channel grows. There were TikTok channels and YouTube channels and whatever built on this case alone, that have, TikTok has, millions of followers based on their coverage of this case. So they got to say stuff, right? So then they go, oh, today I'm going to talk about what I thought. Today I'm going to talk about what this might mean. Today I'm going to talk about whatever that might mean, right? And in the initial days of the case, yeah, it wreaked havoc on the lives of people who we now know had nothing to do with this case. Like Maddie and Kaylee were walking home from the bar with a guy named Jack, and they stopped at a food truck, and the food truck happened to have a live Twitch stream, and Jack is on the stream with Maddie and Kaylee, and it's cold out. It's 32 degrees or whatever it was that night. I think it was 32 and the freezing point. And Jack pulls his hood up, and they start calling him Hoodie Guy. Hoodie Guy. I think it was Hoodie Guy. You can see he pulls his hood up because he knows the camera's there. So he pulls the hood up, is what they say. Like, no, man, it's cold out. But what they said on the internet was he could tell the cameras are there. He pulls his hood up, and then he's the last to see them alive, because after the food truck, they go home and they get murdered an hour and a half later or whatever. Okay. That's what people say. That's what they start saying. And now people are talking about Jack. And now mainstream media is talking about Jack because social media is. So now you got people on News Nation, you got people on whatever going, is Jack blah blah the killer of these girls? We look into that tonight on, whatever. And you're like, what? Like this guy, like they're only doing that because people on TikTok were talking about it. And now you got mainstream media talking about this guy. This guy's getting death threats. Everybody's doxing his family addresses. They got a cabin. Everybody knows where that is. They're putting all the phone numbers out. Jack has to go into hiding because people are like saying Jack's the murderer. The same thing happened with a professor at the university. The same thing happened with Kaylee's boyfriend. The same thing happened with there's all kinds of people calling these people murderers, and all kinds of people. I mean, we're talking millions of people. So, like some of these people, their names will never not be associated with this case. If you Google that name, it's gonna be like best known for being accused of murdering, whatever, right? And that's a lot to live with. So it wreaked havoc, it ruined lives for sure. Um, the social media uh, fire around this stuff was insane. It was crazy, and yeah, lots of people's lives were ruined. And so my feeling is like it didn't help this case necessarily, but it kept it in the light. It kept it in the light. So the police still had the social media buzz led to a lot of the police pressure on the police to solve the case, right? Which is sometimes good. You want eyeballs on your case. If you're the family of the victims, you want people talking about it. It's just you want them to talk about it with a sense of morality and ethics that doesn't also in the process ruin other people's lives. That's what this did for sure. Ruined some lives.
One last question for you, Jay. Between now and when the trial starts next year, do you see any new information coming out about this case, or have you seen anything new that maybe you haven't reported on or wrote about in your book that has come out?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see any new information, public, like official information, because now that they're planning for a trial, they won't release any information they don't have to release. They're not gonna, what we have is what we have until that trial. So officially, it's like if they have more evidence. Like here's the thing: probable cause affidavit. It means here's what we are presenting to you, to a judge, so that we can get a sign off to go arrest this guy. They don't have to put everything they have on him. All they have to put in the probable cause affidavit is just enough. So they say, we got this, we got this, we got this, we got this. This means we can go arrest him. Yeah. The judge says, yep, go arrest him. But they might have 7 more things before that probable cause affidavit even got submitted, but they wanted to hold it back so the public doesn't get it.
Mm.
Like that's very possible as well. So we might learn all kinds of stuff. We might learn they got more than the sheath. We might learn they got, a bloody sock from his closet or whatever, right? But probably not, because we also have the evidence catalogs from his apartment and whatever. But the point is, we're not going to learn anything official. Only thing we're learning now is new things that are like speculation. Like some people are reporting that his father was suspicious of him. The Koberger's father, like after the murders, some people are reporting that, but these people have not come out and publicly said that. So it's like everything now is just speculation, I think, at this point. And I don't think we're going to learn anything new until the trial, no, because the people who have that information, it's not in their interest to let that information out. So, yeah, I think this is going to be, and I think we might not necessarily learn anything at trial that we don't already know. It's possible for that as well. And he might get found guilty of these murders, which is very likely that he will get found guilty of them. And we still might not know anything more, because it's the defense doesn't, and they don't, the prosecution might have nothing more than we already know. And the defense, even if his lawyers know more because they talked to him, they're not going to tell us. So, like, it literally might be he goes to jail and we still don't know why he did it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. And he'll probably get sentenced to death, and he'll probably go to prison. He'll get sentenced to death in Idaho, and for the next 15 years, we'll deal with appeals and all kinds of stuff. And who knows what'll happen if we'll ever learn anything. Or you know what, he might say 2 years from now, I like to tell my story to the first person who gives $3 million to my family or whatever, because he's getting sentenced to death anyway. And maybe somebody will pay $3 million for Brian Koberger's story, and then we'll learn everything. Um, who knows? They say he's not allowed to profit. There's certain situations where it's like you're not allowed to make money off of all that stuff, but it doesn't mean his family can't. And Brian Koberger seems to be somebody who cares about his family a lot. Yeah.
Well, Jay, thank you very much for sitting down with me today and talking about this. The book was absolutely fantastic, and I would love to actually get you on later, some other time, to talk about the kill jar. Yeah, thank you very much again. And for anybody who wants to connect with you, are you on social media?
Yeah, I'm J. Reuben Appelman on Instagram. It's the only social I use, j.reuben.appelman. And then you can also go to my website, jreubenappelman.com. You can go to Dharma Investigations. That's my PI site. I work as a PI. And yeah, anybody just throws in my name. It's easy to find me. I got fake addresses floating around and stuff like that, but you can you can send me a message for sure, man. Hey, I appreciate talking to you too, dude. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for everybody else out there, thank you very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.